Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Castillo. I'm the Teen Services Coordinator at Alexandria Library, based out of Beatley Central Library. We're very excited tonight to host Nacy Veach with the Princeton Review, and tonight we'll be discussing the PSAT and some tips and strategy information for those of you taking the test. Nacy?
Thank you so much, Andrea. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and hear me. So if you cannot, please definitely let me know. As Andrea mentioned, my name is Nacy Veach, and I have worked for the Princeton Review now for almost 7 years. My job, my wonderful job here in the Northern Virginia community is just to give free resources to our local schools and libraries. Okay, so I come with a wealth of knowledge about the PSAT, SAT, ACT, as well as college admissions. So we are going to take a bit of time at the very end of our presentation. So if you have any burning questions for me, you will rest assured you will have the opportunity to go through those things with me. Okay, so as you can see from the screen, the topic of tonight's presentation is the PSAT, now what? And we're positioning this as somewhat of a strategy session. So if you don't have a lot of knowledge, existing knowledge about the PSAT, that is something that we're certainly going to address with you this evening. Now, here is a secret that I would like to share with you all about the PSAT. Okay, in the grand scheme of things, if you don't do well, or your child in this situation potentially doesn't do well, it's okay. If you wake up feeling sick, or your pencil breaks through your Scantron, or you're just having a bad day, or your calculator or batteries die, it's, again, okay, it doesn't matter. If you get a poor score on the PSAT, there really are no consequences. Excuse me. Nobody actually asks you for your PSAT score on your college application, and your PSAT score is also not determinant of your high school GPA. It's your SAT score and your ACT score that's really going to matter so much more. Now, on the other hand, if you get a high score on the PSAT, then it can make a huge difference. If you're locked in, you're focused, and you can set yourself up for better success down the road, or if you're ready for the test, it can open up a lot of possibilities. In other words, if you do really well, you may even be able to earn some money for college, and that's what we're all looking for, right? So the PSAT is pretty much just upside. You can prepare for it, you can plan for it, and you can give it your best shot, but that it is still something that you really, or you should encourage your child to not really stress out about. All right, so today I really wanted to break our session or workshop down into 3 main areas. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what is the PSAT's role in the college admissions process, and what should you expect, what should you expect to see when you take that test? And now, of course, I'm speaking to all of you as if you're the student. So again, if you're a parent, this is information that you can relay to your child. Now, the second idea is, what are the essential test taking skills that you need for any test, and in particular for the PSAT? And then the last thing I want to focus on is shifting gears a bit to talk about the specific strategies that you will need that will help you take the PSAT. Now, my goal for you, whether you're learning to take this test or you're passing this information on, is that when we are finished today, you will know how that you can use the right strategies on the PSAT to get the score that you really need. Excuse me. Now, before I move forward, I'm just going to let everybody know I have some terrible seasonal allergies, so pardon me if I have to stop and take a drink of water. But I do want to first and foremost talk about what is the PSAT. Now, I know we have kind of a small audience today, but if you have a general idea of what the PSAT is or what it stands for, if you could put it in the chat box, I would love to hear your feedback on what you think the PSAT is. Excuse me. Okay, so pre-SAT. Okay, that's great. Anybody else? Let's see. practice SAT. Okay, so the most important thing, it sounds like you guys got it. The most important thing that you need to know about the PSAT is technically it is a preliminary SAT, and it is also a national merit scholarship qualifying test, which is a mouthful. And it's what the College Board allows students to take just one time per year. Now, there's only one major test date for the PSAT, and that happens this year on October the 12th. Now, there will be a Saturday makeup, I believe, on the 25th for students who were not able to take their PSAT on the 12th. And then they have one additional makeup date that happens later in October. Now, unfortunately, you can't choose which one of these test dates you take. Your school is going to decide when that's going to be. So you should ask your school or your school counselor or your college counselor if you don't know. Now, that might seem kind of strange to you, especially if you know that the SAT is offered multiple times per year or throughout the entire year. Why would the real SAT be the one that counts on college applications? And it's offered enough times for students to take it, but then the PSAT isn't. Okay, so that's the burning question. So the PSAT is nearly identical to the SAT. Okay, I'll say it again. It is nearly identical to the SAT. It is not just a preliminary SAT, but it's almost, if you will, a smaller version of the SAT. Now, when you sit down to take the PSAT, know that you will be taking something that's going to look, for the most part, exactly the same as the official College Board SAT test. Now, on the SAT, there is a reading section with 52 questions. Now, that must be answered in 65 minutes of time. And then there's a writing and language section with 44 questions where students are going to be given 35 minutes to answer. And then you have two math sections, just like the official SAT. There's one that does not permit a calculator, 20 questions in 25 minutes. So it's the smallest section of the test. And then you have a calculator-based math section, which is 38 questions and 55 minutes. Now, if you hear my dog in the background drinking, you're going to know what that noise is, so apologies. In comparison, the PSAT actually only has 5 fewer reading sections. It has 10 fewer math questions. It has 19 fewer minutes of testing time. So you're going to see the same types of questions over the same section order and with the same exact layout as the PSAT as you will on the SAT. Now, there is just a little bit less to the PSAT, and this is why we call it a preliminary test. It is also why it is only offered in October and why only sophomores and juniors get to take the PSAT. Now, this isn't the test that counts. It just gets you ready for the test that does count. And that is the way that test makers set it up and the way that they talk about it. Now, the College Board is essentially just saying that you aren't quite ready to take the SAT in the first semester of your junior year yet, but you're very close. Now, if you guys have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Thirsty dogs here, Andrea. They are here. It is here in my home. Okay, moving forward. So the scoring of the PSAT also demonstrates the way the PSAT functions as a preview to the SAT. Now, the PSAT is scored on the same rubric, but is on a slightly different scale than the official test. Okay, so while the SAT is scored on a scale of 400, excuse me, to 1600, the PSAT NMSQT, which is the National Merit Qualifying Test that sophomores and juniors take, is scored on a different scale, which is a 320 to 1520. Now, there's even a PSAT 8-9, and that is actually a test that 8th and 9th graders take, because they do not have the potential to score as highly as 10th or 11th graders. And so their scoring model is a 240 to a 1440. Now, even students taking the PSAT do not have the same potential as those who are taking the SAT, which is why it's an abridged version of the test. Now, this gap is key to not just understanding the scoring, but why it is a preliminary test to the SAT. Now, according to College Board, your total PSAT score is a direct indicator of what your total score is going to be if you took the two tests on the exact same day. Now, I would never ask anyone to ever sit down in one day and take two tests like this back to back. But for example, your total PSAT score of 1,000, if you were to take the SAT that same day, what College Board says is you should have also gotten a 1,000 on the SAT. Now, you might be thinking that's a little bit absurd for you to have a score that shows what you might have scored on a different test had you actually taken it. But think about what that 80-point difference on the high end means. The College Board is saying that they expect students to significantly improve from the time they're taking the PSAT to the time they're taking the SAT. Now, even the very best of test takers are not ready to get a perfect score on the SAT when they take the preliminary SAT. Now, you're not guaranteed to improve those 80 points, okay? So I don't mean that, okay? That's just the difference in the scoring scale. But the chances are you can improve. Now, if the College Board sees your potential on the PSAT as something that you can improve upon, then you need to have that mindset as well. Excuse me. Your score doesn't say that you're destined for this score, okay? It's something that can be prepped for, planned for, and improved. Okay, again, if you have questions, please pop those into the chat. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about what your PSAT score report is going to show you. Here is a College Board example, a score report from the PSAT. So there are quite a few numbers on this page with lots of additional charts and illustrations. Excuse me, you need to focus on what really matters on the scoreboard, and that begins with your total score. Excuse me. Your total score is given on that 320 to 1520 scale. Now, the SAT's 400 to 1600 scale is confusing enough, and understanding what your score tells you about it and how you did is even more challenging when they loop 80 points off of both ends. But fortunately, as I mentioned before, the total score shows how you would do against the SAT, but it also, more importantly, shows a percentile score. So as you can see from the screen, the example student's 960 is in the 51st percentile, which explains underneath, it says that you scored equal to or higher than 51% of students. And so what that means is that this student scoring a 960 is just slightly above average. So if you're not sure of how well you're doing or how well your child is doing, by looking at the total score, you can also gauge it by the percentile against other test takers. Now, the other thing to know about your total score is that it is a combination of two things. It's a combination of your evidence-based reading and writing score as well as your math score. So they just sum those together and give you a total score, and then they represent them as percentiles so that you can know where you stand on the scores. And this will also help you know which sections you're stronger in and where you really want to improve. And now you might have also noticed that the 3 scores at the bottom of the score report are listed. These are your reading, writing, and math test scores. Now, these are essentially the component toward your section scores. So on the SAT, that's all they really are. But on the PSAT, they play a much more important role. Remember how the PSAT is both preliminary and national merit scholarship qualifying. So these scores are how your national merit scholarship score is determined. It's not based on your total score or your section scores, but it's all 3 of those scores with a twist. All right, and so speaking of national merit scholarship qualifying test, or sometimes we shorten that to say NMSQT, one of the greatest things about this test and the PSAT is that students who do well on it have a chance at winning a scholarship, specifically what we just called the National Merit Scholarship. And your PSAT score is not going to determine your qualification. nor do the component scores. Instead, there is a formula that they follow. So your National Merit Scholarship qualifying score is calculated by taking your reading test score plus your writing and language test score, and then they add on your math test score, and then they take those numbers added together and they multiply it by 2. Okay, sounds super confusing. This is the formula that they use to determine this. So whether you're a national merit qualifier or not is dependent on that final number, which is known as a national merit index, or selection index rather. Now, only the top 1%, I will say that again, most parents and students don't get this. Only the top 1% of scores in every individual state are considered national merit qualifiers. Now, if you want to have the chance for a scholarship through national merit, you have to be in the top 1% of all test takers by this metric. It's not an overall 1%. Again, if you're still in the top 1% of your state, that is how you qualify. All right, let's break down a little more and take a look at how national merit qualifications work. So what this means is that very, very few students actually receive national merit recognition. So here's a look at the numbers, and this is directly from the National Merit Scholarship Corporation's website. So overall, each year, generally speaking, 1.6 million juniors take the PSAT. Now, from that group, just 50,000 students are actually recognized as scholars. Now, again, I said they're recognized, so please note, this is recognition. This is not an actual scholarship winner. So then they further narrow that down to 16,000 students, and those become our national merit semifinalists. And then breaking it down even more, we're going down to 15,000 finalists, meaning that those are actually the people who receive a scholarship. And if you did not know, the National Merit Scholarship Award is $2,500. So, you know, just looking at this, you can tell that very few students are actually getting the scholarship. And even those who do get the scholarship are not getting the amount that fully pays for college, or, you know, for some schools, it's not even a year's worth of college. So although the PSAT is a qualification exam, it's not the best to think about it as a chance at a scholarship. And you should think about it more as a great test run of what you're going to see when you take the important test, which is the SAT. All right, stopping for questions for just a moment to see if anyone has any before we move forward. All right, I'll keep an eye on the chat in case those do pop up. But now I want to really talk about our next big idea, which is going to be, oh, hold on, I think we have a question. Correct. The question is, the scholarship is $2,500. Yes, that is the National Merit Qualifying Scholarship, $2,500. I know I think many parents and students work themselves up over it in trying to get that recognition, and it's a great thing to put on your college application. However, from a financial standpoint, the scholarship really, in the grand scheme of things, is not that tremendous. All right, thanks for your question. Okay, so back to our second idea here, we're going to talk about test taking essentials. So before we really get into what you're facing on the PSAT, we have to talk about some strategies that apply to generally any standardized test. Okay, so what I'm about to tell you today is going to apply to the PSAT, which is why you're here probably, or perhaps you want to relate that to the SAT or ACT. These test taking strategies also apply to AP exams or even IB exams. And to go even further down the road, they apply to graduate level exams. So, you know, when you or your child goes to graduate school, these things will help with the MCAT or LSAT or the GRE or the GMAT. So again, they apply to any standardized test. Okay, so what are you facing when you take the PSAT? Let's start with what the PSAT actually measures. So we're gonna play a game of true or false here, and I'm not gonna make you participate in the chat or anything since we have a small group today. But as I go through these, I would love for you to just pop the answer in your head. And I would love to tell you, there's no wrong answer to this, but the truth is I can't. I can tell you that we've put these here because we see wrong answers all the time, and some of them aren't really as definitive as we would like them to be. So we're sure you have heard some of these things, and we want to make sure you know the right or mostly right answer. All right, so here we go. All right, first question. Do college admissions tests like the PSAT measure your intelligence? Okay. Now, if you said in your head false, you would be absolutely correct. Standardized tests do not measure your intelligence. How well you do has nothing to do with how smart you are or even how creative you are. But what do they really test, right? How well you take the test. That is what they're measuring, how well you take a test. A 1500 on the PSAT means you're just an excellent test taker. Bad score means you're just a bad test taker. This is a test of test taking skills, which measures your ability to take the test. And it has to be that way because these are given to students all over the world who have taken different classes and are used to comparing are used to compare students with different academic skills and different interests. Secondly, do college admission tests like the PSAT reflect your high school GPA? Okay, if you're thinking in your head false, you are also correct. No, they don't at all. Think about it this way. So half of the PSAT is math, while half of it, while math is only just one class that you take in high school. And a student who's not strong at math will do much worse on the PSAT than in high school. But also your GPA is based on so many other things like coursework, projects, essays, and other tests, which we're going to get into in just a moment. But the PSAT is simply just a test. Okay, now this isn't a high school test. The PSAT is part of a series of college admissions tests, which you already know, like the SAT and ACT. All right, so moving forward, do these types of tests like the PSAT measure your, predict your college GPA? Once again, false. It does a worse job actually of predicting a student's college GPA than reflecting how a student's high school GPA is. So once you're in college, you're going to be able to focus on so many other things that you enjoy and you're good at in your major. And so what that means is that you're going to likely do better in college than you're going to do in high school. Also, you're going to be taking fewer tests in college than you did in high school, making test-taking skills less important when you go to college. And then finally, this is the most important question of all. Do these tests, like the PSAT, test what you've learned in high school? Okay, this one is a little bit more difficult, okay? Any of those answers could actually be correct. There are going to be things on the PSAT that you learned in high school. There just are. The Pythagorean theorem, for example, is definitely going to come up somewhere on the test, right, whenever you take it. Even skills that you've learned way back in middle school may pop up on the test, and you're, obviously going to need to understand basic grammar principles. But some of the things, some of the content on these types of tests is what makes it so difficult. Instead, it's that standardized tests are completely different from the high school tests that students are used to taking. Okay. So the tests that you or your child are used to taking in high school are totally different, completely different. This is not just true of the PSAT, guys. It is also true of the SAT and ACT. It's true of the AP exams that students take, and it's also true of IB. And if you don't know what that means you probably are not set up for an IB school. But all of that to say this, your high school test follows a certain pattern. They cover a limited subject matter, at most only 1 year of one course, like in case of a final. But usually your high school tests cover just a few chapters or even one chapter from a textbook. Even more importantly, a high school test is going to evaluate your content knowledge, how much you actually know about a subject. And that's why in class, your child is usually given plenty of time to finish an exam, and why teachers also want to give partial or extra credit. Now, they can also do that because high school tests are graded by humans, generally your teachers. And then lastly, your high school tests are just one element of your overall grade in one course. Okay, and the completely different beast here, as we've talked about, are standardized tests. These types of standardized tests, and I'm going to lump all of them together again, PSAT, SAT, ACT, by contrast, cover years of material. They jump around not only between grammar and reading and math, but they also go between different topics within those subjects. And in order to succeed, it doesn't really matter what you know, but if you can memorize the details and deploy the strategies on a standardized test. Now, you have to do all of this in a rigorously timed setting, which pacing is very difficult for some students. And then you need to make sure you get the right answer. And, then the test is machine graded. It's not graded. So partial credit, extra credit is completely off the table. And if all of that stuff isn't stressful enough, the score is the only thing that matters. And so this is why we often see a disconnect between students who perform really well in school on high school tests, but they flunk out or don't get the score they're looking for on standardized tests. Okay, and so this makes it much more difficult for many students. Okay, you've learned one way to take a test for your entire life, and now you're being judged on something that is completely different. Okay, so I mentioned pacing just a second ago. So I want to talk about some overall strategies. Most importantly, a student needs to understand and know how to pace themselves. So if you're terrible, absolutely terrible at pacing yourself on a test, it's because you're human and because tests can be extremely stressful. So, many students approach this test much like a rabbit. So I'm going to give you guys the tortoise and the hare analogy, okay? And I know you've all heard it before and you understand the gist of it, but I want to apply this to test taking so that it resonates in a different way. So we're going to assume that the rabbit or the hare, is an average math student. Now, if the rabbit sees 48 questions on the PSAT math sections, the rabbit is going to do what a rabbit does, right? Speed through them, charge ahead, do every single question as quickly as possible. This can be problematic, right? The rabbit is going to make silly mistakes, probably get plenty of questions wrong. And in fact, let's just say, as I said before, if the rabbit is an average math student, then they're only going to probably get about 20, let's just say, for example, 23 of those questions correct. And what that's going to look like, excuse me, is a 490 on the PSAT math, which is just about in the 50th percentile. Okay, example 2. So we talked about the rabbit. We're going to have the turtle. Okay, so the turtle is also an average math student, but the turtle knows its strengths. So let's say the turtle is only going to do the questions it's most comfortable with, maybe only 40 of them total. So that doesn't mean the turtle gets all 40 correct, right? In fact, the turtle's still going to make some mistakes because that's just how the test works. So the turtle is only going to get maybe 30 out of the 40 questions correct. But the turtle is also going to do something a little different. The turtle is going to guess on the remaining questions, meaning that, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 more questions get added correctly, just completely on the fact that it's guessing. And what that's going to look like is a 580, okay? 550. Now, the PSAT does not have a guessing penalty, meaning that they count blank answers the same as incorrect answers. So they're going to both be wrong. So what that means also is that you should always put down an answer, even if it is a complete and total guess. So just by understanding the proper pacing for the test, the turtle, aka you, who you want to be as a student or who you want your child to be as a student, can gain tons of extra PSAT math points over the rabbit, even though they're both the exact same type of student. So all of that to say is pacing can make a huge difference in your overall scores. Okay, moving on. You will also be a much more successful student, or your child will be a more successful student if they know how to guess the correct way. And yes, before anybody says it, there actually is a correct way to guess. I want to show you two different approaches to making completely random guesses. Now, students often waste time by trying to guess right, even if they have no idea what the question is asking, or if they don't have time to complete every question. Now, there's a simple solution that I'm going to show you to guessing on the PSAT. This applies to the SAT, the ACT, AP exams, and IB exams as well. And it's a demonstration of what you need to do. Now, which of these examples do you think is going to score higher? Okay, we have two options. We have the straight up and down. In this example, it's B all the way down. Or mixing it up, I think we've heard it as, make a Christmas tree, just like draw a design. I would love to hear from you in the chat if you think you know which way is going to give you the most possible points. Is it straight up and down or mixing it up? Okay, so I had one person say the first one. Does anyone want to debate that? Is the first one going to give you more points, or is the second one going to give you more points? Okay, all right, 2 votes for first. Does anybody else disagree? Excuse me. All right, so we got some smarties in the group. So it is actually going to be the first ones. So we have a student or parent, Andrew. Thank you so much for your comment. So the comment says it's unlikely that the test makers would have all the answers all be in a row. You're absolutely right. They're not all going to be B or A or C or any of that, okay? But you are still going to get the most correct potential answers by the first column. And we're going to call this letter of the day. So when you sit down to take the PSAT or SAT, ACT, you're going to answer all the questions that you have time for first. And if you run out of time, or you just have absolutely no idea at all, it's not even a 50-50, you just don't have a clue, you're going to pick a letter, okay? It does not matter if it's A, B, C, or D. There is no specific answer that's going to be, I was always told in school C. They're all just always pick C. There are more C's, right? That's not true. But what happens with letter of the day is that it works for 2 reasons. The first reason is it saves you time, okay? You can pick that letter and you don't even have to think about it. If you have 0 clue under the sun, you just mark it B, okay? And secondly, you're not going to be spending precious moments just drawing a Christmas tree or A, B, C, D, D, A, B, C, because probability states that if you're answering all of them the same, that at least 25% of those questions are actually going to be the letter that you chose. So by staying consistent, you're giving yourself a 1 in 4 shot of getting the answer right consistently. All right, that's a good one. Okay. So that's higher, that's lower. All right, so the next one is a very simple concept. Most of you guys probably know this. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the capital of Malawi? Without pulling out your phone or doing a Google search, in all of the years that I have done these types of presentations, I have only ever found one person who could actually tell me the capital of Malawi, okay? So this is another key aspect of standardized tests that you don't even maybe realize is a huge advantage on the SAT or the PSAT. You've been taking multiple choice tests for so long that you're not even aware of the strategy that you could use. But it is called process of elimination. Now you can see how it works. So I've asked you a simple question that you probably, without Google, do not know the answer to. However, in the case of multiple choice tests, when I give you 4 answers, anybody out there know the correct answer? Is it just screaming out at you? Is it much more apparent now that you have 4 choices to choose from? Of course it is. Because of experience, we know that Paris, London, and Amsterdam are not the capitals of Malawi. So Lilongwe is going to be the most obvious answer. And thank you for participating and telling me D. All right, and so that's going to bring me to another problem that we see on the PSAT, which is test writers know how to trick you. I would think that it is their absolute top priority and job to be a test writer for any of these tests to see how tricky they can be and try to stump you on the test. Now, I'm going to give you a simple illustration of this. I'm going to put up a seemingly simple question that's going to be still missed by many students. All right, so if x plus 7 equals 10, what does x plus 3 equal? So if you're rushing and you're not paying close attention, the very first number that may pop in your head, because we're all used to doing basic algebra at this point, is the number 3, right? So if you're not actually paying attention to what the question's asking you, many of you could potentially select 3 as the answer, okay? Now, we know that 3 is not the answer, because if you do the math, you can figure out that x is equal to 3 and x plus 3 is equal to 6. Okay, the PSAT is not difficult because it has difficult concepts, but it's difficult because it presents concepts that you have to learn to handle so that it does not come across in a difficult way. Specifically, it's built to make you make mistakes. All right, wonderful. And that's why most of the common mistakes that cause students to answer questions incorrectly are really, really simple. You probably won't get questions wrong because you don't know the quadratic equation or a difficult vocabulary word, but you will get them wrong because you're going to do a few small things, or your child may do a few small things to just mess themselves up. All right, so the first one first common mistake that we often see is that students answer questions too quickly, just like in the previous math question, okay? This is something that also applies to high school tests too. Rushing never ends well. Next, you are going to put down careless answers, like not noticing the difference between a semicolon and a colon on the grammar section, even though you may know the grammar rules. Another example of common mistakes we see is that you make mistakes by doing all the work in your head. Now, there are all sorts of distractions when you sit down to take a test like this. You know, somebody could be tapping their pencil, or there may be a siren outside, and all of these things can distract you if you attempt to do work in your head, especially in the math sections. Now, another common problem is that students often misread some problems. So, you know, maybe they'll see an increase instead of a decrease, or, you know, they're looking for the characterization that the author would give rather than misreading the word not that they're not supposed to be looking for. So misreading the problem. And then lastly, you can also mess up if you do not understand what to do. And I don't mean that you don't know a formula or something like that. I mean that you just absolutely do not know the specific task that the question is asking you to do. So you need all the right strategies on these individual PSAT questions to avoid these common mistakes. All right, take just a second to see if we have questions. Excuse me. I do not see questions, so we are going to move forward. All right, so this is the last section, and it takes us to part 3, where we want to talk about PSAT specific test strategies. Now, any standardized test uses specific types of questions, and you always need to know what to expect on any exam that you take, but you should also keep in mind that the PSAT is going to be yours or your child's trial run for the SAT. So the types of questions you see on the PSAT are the exact same. I'll say that again. They are the exact same type of questions that you're going to see on the official test. Think of it as your chance to work on SAT questions before the SAT. So also the questions I'm about to show you come from our online PSAT practice test. You can take it. I mean, I wouldn't expect anyone to take it today. But you can sign up for it today, tomorrow, this weekend on princetonreview.com, and I'll give you the link to that. It's a completely free test that you can take, and it does help you get a preview of those questions and learn strategies that are going to help you on PSAT day. All right, so we are going to do 3 example types of problems, and then we are going to wrap up for Q&A. And this is a question about words in context. So the College Board has boasted repeatedly over and over again that it does not, or no longer, I should say, wants to test students on arcane vocabulary that they're not ever going to use. Now, that does not mean that they're not going to ask you about word meanings. So in fact, they have a specific type of question, as you can see on the screen, called words in context. A words in context question always looks the same. It says, like, in line blank, this word most nearly means. And you're going to see at least one of those on every single reading passage on the PSAT, possibly even 2 on some of those passages. Now, here is why this really presents itself as tricky. Okay, on a time test like the PSAT, students will always try shortcuts. The obvious one here is to find a word that is a synonym with the one in the question. But I can absolutely promise you that all 4 answer choices is going to be a synonym. You see how all 4 answer choices on this example are synonyms of the word rot? This might not be a word you would use, but it is one that you would recognize and you've probably heard. You can't just rely on knowing which word is most similar, and you have to actually look at the passage. Now, the passage is a very tricky passage. It's adapted from the Federalist Paper 2 by John Jay. And the test is asking you, the question is asking you rather to decipher the meaning of a word in an 18th century political piece. So that means it, that makes it better for you to place the word in context. Now, find rot in line 33. Now read around it to see where something describes what it means. And the passage speaks of things that have wrought this change. And then just 3 lines later, it says, adopt these new political tenets. Now find the answer choice that comes closest to meaning adopt new tenets. Now the only answer choice that even makes sense in this context is A, cause. And that is going to be your correct answer. And this may seem like a complex way to find the meaning of a word, but once you are familiar with the strategy, you can do this quickly and easily. All right, second one. Now, you need to also adopt strategies to make sure that the test writers are not tricking you on the writing and language section of the test as well. Now, technically, the writing and language sections covers grammar as well, so many students are tempted to think through every possible grammar rule that exists. Do not do that. Take this example. So the test asks you to read a passage and then fix the underlined portion by choosing which answer provides the best grammar and mechanics. Therefore, you're probably going to want to do something like this. This trend should remind us that creativity can strike anywhere, and of the Nobel Committee's great merits is that they have. Oh, question 7. Let's see. Choices are they have, we are, it has, and they might have. Then students usually see which sounds the best. So what I want you guys to do instead is flip the question around. Excuse me. Look at the answer choices. What is changing in each choice? It's the pronoun. I'm going between plural and singular. So find what noun the pronoun in this sentence is referring to. And it steps in for Nobel Committee. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one because the Nobel Committee is a group, but it is treated as one thing. So, that makes it what we call a collective noun. And you can simply spot that it is a singular noun, and you can choose the answer that also has the singular pronoun. So as we know here, the correct answer is choice C, it has. All right, last one before our wrap up. Finally, we should look at a math question. Quite often, PSAT and SAT writers will trick you on math questions by making you do, math. Take this example. So years of high school math have trained you to look at this question and build an algebra problem. In your high school math class, if you see what is the value of x, y, if 3x plus y equals 16 and 3x plus 2y equals 23, you'll start building an equation. You would try to isolate X and Y to find their relationship to each other. But this isn't your high school math class, guys. This is a multiple choice test that has 4 possible answer choices. So use them and do what we call PETA, plug in the answers. Start with an answer choice. A, put 3 in for X and 7 for Y. Do the math. Okay, that part is correct. And then 3 times 3 is 9 plus 2 times 7 is 14, which equals 23. And then by doing this math, you will see that A is the correct answer. So by plugging in the answers into the equation, it helps save you time. Now you could try all the other answers just to be sure, but that does take time. And remember that there's only one correct answer on any multiple choice question. So if you plug in the answers until you find the correct answer, then that means you are done. You saved yourself a bit of time on that question and you can move on. All right, so enough school for today. We've talked about the PSAT in plenty of different ways, yet you might still be wondering, how do I actually know if I am ready for the PSAT, or how do I know if my child is ready for the PSAT? Now, first things first, always remember that if you don't do well on a PSAT, it's no big deal. This is a prelude to the SAT. So you still have plenty of time to prepare for the real test. But if you want to see how you'll do on the PSAT, there's a simple answer. Take a practice test. We offer SAT practice tests through the library here, but you can also just go straight to the website and look for a full-length PSAT practice test. And you're going to see lots of different questions on the PSAT. They're going to have the same section order. They will be in on the real test with the same time constraints as the real test. And you can literally see how the PSAT is going to feel when you do it for real. You'll also get a score on your practice test that will be accompanied by a score report that tells you not just how you did, but how you can actually improve. Okay, so the PSAT is soon enough that you're not going to really be able to fully prepare for it the way you should for the SAT this year, but you can get a head start on test prep just by taking a free test and seeing where you stand. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. So remember that little secret we began with. If you do poorly on the PSAT, it won't matter, right? That's what I said. Yet, if you do really well, it can accomplish quite a bit. The PSAT is upside. You can make sure you approach it with the correct frame of mind, and it's only beneficial from you from there. Now, don't forget, you can get the score that you're looking for on the PSAT if you use the right strategies. So we talked about how it is a preliminary SAT, which means it's almost exactly like the SAT. We've talked about national merit scholarships. We've gone through general test taking strategies, as well as a few actual questions that you could potentially see similar on the real PSAT. We talked about strategies like pacing, process of elimination, plugging in the answer, and the hopes is that all of this information that you've been given is going to help you become ready for the PSAT. And if you still don't feel ready, you can also take a practice test, right? So with all that being said, it is now time. We have 8 minutes left, and it is time for Q&A. If you have any burning questions about the PSAT, or it could even be about the SAT or ACT as well, since they're so interconnected, I would be happy to go through those questions with you and make sure that you leave here today with no questions. Okay, so I'm going to take just a minute to see if anyone has any to pop in the chat. And in the meantime, I will let you all know that I am going to send out a follow-up email to you tomorrow. Well, we're going to try and get the recording to the session, as well as some free resources, such as the practice test that I mentioned, so that you guys have lots of things in your toolbox to help you start the first steps of getting ready for college. Okay, so still waiting for questions. I'm going to give that about a minute or so. And I don't see any coming in, but I am going to stick around for another minute. I just want to tell everyone thank you so much for joining us this evening. I have thoroughly enjoyed the time with you and hope that you found something useful out of this presentation. If you have any questions at all, my email address is on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me.